She arrived with nothing but a borrowed mule, a rusted axe, and a determination that had been forged by disappointment rather than hope. The land was wild and raw, tucked against the edge of the pine-heavy foothills, where the wind carried the smell of sap and snow even in early autumn. No neighbors greeted her. No road welcomed her wheels. Just a clearing she chose because it was far enough from everything that had failed her before. Each morning, before the sun burned the frost off the grass, she stood in that clearing and studied the trees as if they were enemies she intended to conquer one by one. She chopped slowly, not because she was weak, but because every swing carried memory, hands once held that were now gone, promises once made that had dried up like creek beds in summer. When the first log fell, she rested her forehead against its rough bark and let herself breathe. This cabin was not a dream, it was survival. From the ridge above the clearing he watched. He had not meant to. At first he told himself it was coincidence, that his cattle grazed wide, that his fence line pushed close to her chosen land. But by the third morning, when he found himself slowing his horse, just to glimpse the rise and fall of her shoulders as she worked, he knew it was something else. He was a widower, though the word still felt sharp in his chest. His wife had died 3 winters ago, leaving behind a quiet house, a cold bed, and the echo of children they never had. The ranch thrived, the land obeyed him, but his life had shrunk into routines meant to keep grief from speaking too loudly. And then there she was, alone, unguarded, fierce in her solitude, building something from nothing. It unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. She worked without help because she expected none. Her hands blistered and split, blood darkening the grain of the log she dragged into place. She learned quickly which trees fell clean and which twisted as they died, fighting her until the last crack of timber echoed through the woods. At night she slept wrapped in canvas beneath the stars, the axe close enough to reach without looking. Wolves howled in the distance, and once the wind carried the sound of a man's laughter from far away, a memory. Not real, but it made her sit upright, heart pounding, until dawn broke the illusion. She did not cry. Tears were for people who believed someone would come running when they fell apart. He noticed the blood first. From the ridge, through the thinning trees, he saw her pause, shake her hand, then wrap it in a strip torn from her shirt. Something in his chest tightened. He'd seen that kind of stubborn before, in his wife, back when she'd refused to stop working the ranch, even as sickness hollowed her out. He almost rode down then, almost called out to offer help, but fear rooted him in place. Fear of rejection, fear of opening a door he'd spent years barricading. So he stayed where he was, watching, telling himself she didn't want him there, telling himself she was better off alone. It was a lie he told often these days. By the 5th day, the base of the cabin began to take shape. Logs stacked carefully, corners notched with surprising precision. Anyone passing might have assumed a man built it, and she took a strange pride in that. She spoke to the wood sometimes, muttering encouragement or curses, her voice rough but steady. She spoke to the silence too, daring it to answer her. It never did. Still, she felt eyes on her more than once, a prickling awareness between her shoulder blades, but when she turned, there was only forest and sky. She told herself loneliness was playing tricks on her. She had sworn never to depend on anyone again. That evening, a storm rolled in without warning. Clouds swallowed the sunset, and thunder cracked like a warning shot across the mountains. She tried to secure the canvas, but the wind tore at it violently, rain pelting her skin like thrown stones. She slipped in the mud, her injured hands screaming in protest, and for one terrifying moment she lay there, rain filling her mouth, the sky roaring above her. The thought came uninvited, if I die here, no one will know. It wasn't fear that made her gasp. It was the quiet acceptance of how small she truly was. That was when he moved. He didn't think. He didn't weigh consequences. He spurred his horse down the ridge, rain soaking his coat, boots splashing through mud as he dismounted and ran toward her. She saw him only when his shadow fell across her, broad and sudden, and she scrambled backward, reaching for her axe. His hands lifted instinctively, palms open, His voice raised over the storm, calm but urgent. He told her his name. He told her he lived nearby. He told her she was hurt and the storm would worsen. She stared at him like a cornered animal, rain streaming down her face, distrust burning brighter than fear. For a long moment they stood there, two broken lives caught between thunderclaps. Then another crack split the sky, closer this time, and the decision was made not by trust, but by survival. She let him help her up. As he guided her toward the half-built shelter of logs, his hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching, something old and aching stirred inside him. And as she followed, watching him from the corner of her eye, she felt something even more dangerous than fear begin to loosen its grip on her chest. Something like hope. The storm settled into the night like a living thing, prowling the clearing and worrying at the half-built cabin with claws of wind and rain. Water streamed through the gaps between the logs, soaking the earth floor and turning it slick beneath their boots. He worked quickly, wordlessly, bracing the loose timbers with his shoulder while she held them steady, her injured hand clenched tight to keep from shaking. Every so often, thunder boomed so close it seemed to crack the sky in two, and each time she flinched despite herself. He noticed, and though he said nothing, he shifted his body subtly, so that he stood between her and the open side of the shelter, as if he could shield her from the storm by sheer will. The gesture unsettled her more than the weather. No one had done that for her in a very long time. When the worst of the rain passed, the world fell into a heavy, dripping silence. Water slid from pine needles in soft, rhythmic taps, and mist rose from the ground like breath. She sank down on a log, exhaustion finally claiming her, and that was when he knelt in front of her without asking. He took her wrapped hand gently, his touch firm but careful. The way a man handles something precious without meaning to reveal. He knows its value. She stiffened, ready to pull away, but pain betrayed her and she hissed softly. He frowned, not in judgment, but in concern, and peeled back the makeshift bandage to inspect the damage. The cut was deep and angry, the skin swollen and raw from days of work without rest. He told her it needed cleaning. He told her she was lucky it wasn't worse. He didn't tell her how seeing her blood had twisted something deep in his chest. She watched his face as he worked, the lines carved there by sun and sorrow, the way his jaw tightened with focus. He smelled of leather and rain and something warm beneath it, something that reminded her of barns and safe places she hadn't known since childhood. She realized with a start that he wasn't treating her like a fragile thing. He didn't scold, he didn't lecture. He simply helped, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That frightened her more than cruelty ever could. Kindness always demanded a price, and she had paid too dearly for it before. He told her he was a widower, only when she asked why he lived alone so close by. The word hung between them heavy and reverent. He said it simply, without dramatics, but his eyes shifted away, fixed on the darkened trees, as if they might offer answers he no longer had. She did not ask how his wife died. Some grief announced itself plainly, and hers recognized his like a mirror. Instead, she told him why she was there, that she needed land where no one knew her, where she could build something that couldn't be taken away by signatures or false promises. Her voice wavered once, just once, and she hated herself for it. He listened, truly listened, not with impatience or pity, but with a stillness that invited her words out rather than dragging them from her. When she finished, the silence felt different, not empty but shared. He nodded once, as if he understood far more than she'd said. He told her the winters there were brutal. He told her she'd need a solid roof before the first snow. He didn't tell her she should leave. He didn't tell her she couldn't do it. That more than anything earned her cautious respect. Morning came pale and cold, the storm leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean. He helped her without asking, lifting logs as if they weighed nothing, showing her how to notch the corners so the walls would hold against wind. She bristled at first, correcting him sharply when she thought he was taking over. But he adjusted immediately, stepping back, letting her lead. It was a strange dance, two independent souls circling the same task, learning the rhythm of each other's boundaries. By midday, the cabin stood taller, stronger, the promise of shelter taking real shape. As they worked, she caught glimpses of the man behind the widower. He hummed sometimes under his breath, old tunes that sounded like lullabies. Once when a log slipped, he laughed, a short, surprised sound that seemed to startle even him. She felt something loosen in her chest at that sound. Something she hadn't known was still tight. In return, she found herself speaking more than she intended, telling him how she learned to handle an axe from her father, how she never meant to end up alone, how life had a way of narrowing until all you could do was move forward or disappear. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions. He simply stayed. By late afternoon, he said he should go. His cattle would need checking, and night came fast this time of year. She nodded, telling herself the disappointment she felt was only fatigue. He hesitated, then pressed a small tin of salve into her uninjured hand, telling her to use it twice a day. She didn't thank him right away. Gratitude had a way of opening doors she wasn't ready to step through. But as he mounted his horse and turned back toward the ridge, she found herself calling out, asking if he'd come back tomorrow. The way his face lit, then subtle but unmistakable, stayed with her long after he disappeared into the trees. She told herself it was temporary. He told himself the same, and neither of them believed it. He returned the next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, his horse moving at an easy, familiar pace, as if the path itself had been waiting for him. She heard him before she saw him, the soft clink of tack, the muted rhythm of hooves on damp earth, and something inside her stilled. It was not anticipation, she told herself. It was caution. She wiped her hands on her trousers, squared her shoulders, and reminded herself that this was still her land, her work, her life. When he stepped into the clearing, had tipped low against the pale light, she noticed he carried more than tools this time. A bundle of cured meat, a small sack of flour, a coil of rope. Practical things. No flowers, no sentiment. It eased her, even as it stirred something she didn't want to name. They worked in near silence for hours, the kind that didn't press or demand, but simply existed between them, shaped by shared effort. The cabin rose steadily, the walls now chest-high, the structure solid enough that she could imagine warmth inside it. A fire crackling against the cold nights to come. He showed her how to brace the walls with temporary supports, how to test each joint before trusting it with weight. She listened, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Trust crept in quietly like sunlight through branches. Not enough to burn, just enough to warm. Near midday, trouble came. She sensed it first, the sudden hush of birds, the way the woods seemed to draw in on themselves. He froze mid-step, his hand lifting slightly, palm down, a silent warning. Then the low growl reached them, rumbling from the tree line like distant thunder. A cougar, thin and desperate, its eyes fixed on the clearing and the easy meal two distracted humans might make. Her breath caught, fear spiking sharp and immediate. But before panic could take hold, he moved. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between her and the sound. His body tense but controlled. He told her to stay still, his voice low and steady, as if calm were something he could lend her. The confrontation passed without violence. A shout, a thrown stone, the sudden display of two unyielding will sent the animal retreating, back into the woods. But the danger lingered in the air long after the sound of its movement faded. Her hands shook when it was over, adrenaline draining fast. He turned to her then, really looked at her, and she saw something raw in his eyes, fear not for himself, but for her. It undid her more completely than the storm had. That was when the truth slipped out of her. She told him why she couldn't go back to town, why building this cabin wasn't just about independence, but escape. She spoke of a marriage that had promised safety and delivered control, of a home where love was measured in obedience, of the moment she realized staying would erase her entirely. The words came haltingly at first, then in a rush, years of silence breaking open. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears could be used against you. He listened, jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides, not in anger at her, but at the world that had taught her to endure such things alone. When she finished, she braced herself for questions, for judgment, for the inevitable suggestion that she should have tried harder. stayed longer, been more patient. None of that came. Instead, he told her about his wife, how illness had taken her slowly, relentlessly, until caring for her became his whole world. How he had begged her to rest, to let him shoulder the burden, and how she had smiled at him and kept going anyway, determined to leave him with a life that could still stand when she was gone. He told her about the child they'd lost years before that, a tiny grave marked by a stone he still visited every spring. His voice broke once, barely, and he did not hide it. Something shifted between them then. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people who had loved deeply and paid for it, standing in the aftermath of loss and choosing, against all instinct, not to turn away. As evening fell, the temperature dropped fast. He insisted she come back to his ranch for the night, just until the roof was on. She refused at first, pride flaring, but when the wind cut sharp and her injured hand throbbed painfully, she relented. The ranch house was warm, modest, filled with the quiet presence of someone who lived there alone, but not without memory. She noticed the small details, the extra plate in the cupboard, the worn rocking chair by the fire, the way he paused before opening certain doors. He gave her one of the guest rooms, leaving a lantern lit and a blanket folded at the foot of the bed, then retreated as if afraid to intrude. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, she realized how long it had been since she felt safe enough to sleep deeply. On the other side of the wall, he sat by the fire, staring into the flames, feeling the same unfamiliar weight in his chest. Watching her build her cabin had awakened something he thought grief had buried for good. Wanting was dangerous, loving even more so. But as the house settled around them, the silence was no longer empty. It was full of possibility. Morning at the ranch arrived softly, light spilling through thin curtains and laying pale stripes across the floor. She woke disoriented at first, her body braced for danger that did not come. The air was warm, the bed solid beneath her, and somewhere in the house a kettle began to sing. Safety, she realized, could feel just as startling as fear when you were unused to it. She dressed quietly and stepped into the main room, where he stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair still damp from washing. For a moment they simply looked at one another, both aware of how easily the night could have shifted into something else, and how carefully they had avoided letting it do so. Breakfast was simple: bread, eggs, coffee strong enough to bite, but it felt ceremonial in its own way. They spoke of practical things, the roof beams, the coming cold, how much daylight they had left before winter claimed the mountains. Yet beneath every word ran an undercurrent neither named. When they finished, he saddled his horse without asking whether she would return to the cabin that day. He already knew the answer. She would not abandon what she had started, and he would not let her face it alone, now that he'd chosen to step into her path. Back at the clearing, work resumed with new urgency. The roof demanded long hours and precise coordination, and they fell into a rhythm that felt almost intimate, lifting, bracing, passing tools without speaking. He caught her once when her footing slipped, his hands firm at her waist, holding her steady longer than strictly necessary. The moment stretched, charged and fragile, until she pulled away gently, reminding them both of the invisible lines still drawn between them. He respected that without question, stepping back, though the absence of her warmth left his hands aching. As the days passed, her cabin began to look less like a struggle and more like a home. The roof went on, the walls sealed, the floor leveled. He brought scraps of glass for a small window, and when she fitted it into place, light poured through in a way that made her laugh, a real laugh, surprised and unguarded. He froze at the sound, struck by how rare and precious it was, how much it stirred something hopeful and terrifying inside him. He wanted that sound to live in his house too. The thought frightened him enough that he said nothing. The town noticed soon enough. Supplies ran low, and she had no choice but to ride with him into town for nails. The moment they arrived, eyes followed her, whispers bloomed like weeds. A woman alone building a cabin, suddenly appearing beside the widowed rancher, everyone, New people drew conclusions as easily as breath. She felt old defenses rise, her spine stiffening, but he surprised her again. When a man at the feed store made a crude remark under his breath, he did not laugh it off or ignore it. He stepped closer, voice calm but edged with steel, and made it very clear that she was under his protection. The room went quiet. No one challenged him. Outside, she confronted him, anger flashing. She did not need saving, she told him sharply. He listened, then answered just as calmly that protection was not the same as control. He would never speak for her without cause, but he would also never stand by while others tried to diminish her. The sincerity in his eyes unraveled her fury, leaving behind something more dangerous, gratitude. She nodded once, accepting it, though it felt like another brick loosened in the wall around her heart. That night, as they rode back beneath a sky crowded with stars, she asked him why he had stayed alone so long. The question lingered between them, heavy and intimate. He told her the truth, that loving his wife had been easy, losing her unbearable, and opening himself to the possibility of that pain again felt like inviting death. Back into his home, he admitted that watching her build her cabin, alone and unbroken, had reminded him that survival was not the same as living. Saying it aloud felt like stepping onto unstable ground, but once spoken, the words could not be taken back. She understood too well. She told him that independence had been her armor, that relying on no one meant no one could hurt her again. But armor, she was learning, also kept warmth out. They rode the rest of the way in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because the truth they had shared needed space to breathe. At the cabin he lingered, helping her stack wood, fixing the door hinges so they would not groan in the night. When it was time to leave, neither of them moved at first. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Finally he reached out, stopping just short of touching her cheek, his hand hovering there as if asking permission without words. She met his gaze, fear and longing warring in her chest, and slowly nodded. His touch was gentle, reverent. Not a claim, not a promise, just acknowledgement. The simple intimacy of it left her breathless. As he rode away, she stood in the doorway of the cabin she had built with her own hands and realized something had changed forever. She was no longer building just to survive winter. She was building in the presence of a future she had sworn never to want. And he, riding back to an empty house that felt empty no longer, knew he was standing at the edge of a choice that would either heal him or break him all over again. Winter announced itself early, not with a gentle cooling, but with a hard, decisive frost that silvered the ground overnight and turned breath into ghosts. The cabin stood ready, sturdy, modest, unmistakably hers, its roof tight, its walls sealed against the coming snow. Yet safety, she learned, did not quiet the deeper unease growing inside her. The town's whispers followed them now, carried on glances and half-spoken warnings. A woman living alone still unsettled people, and a widower choosing her company unsettled them even more. She felt the pressure like weather, invisible but relentless, shaping choices whether she wished it or not. The threat came quietly, as such things often do. One evening, she returned from checking her traps to find the door ajar and bootprints in the frost that were not hers. Nothing was taken, but something had been moved, her tools rearranged. The axe shifted deliberately, a message without words. Her chest tightened with an old, familiar fear. She did not wait this time. She rode straight to his ranch. Anger and terror braided together and told him everything. He listened, face hardening, a protector's instinct. Flaring, but he checked it, reminding himself she needed partnership, not command. They faced it together. He spent nights nearby, not inside her cabin unless invited, his presence a quiet sentinel against the dark. When the intruder returned, emboldened by isolation, he was met not by a frightened woman, but by two resolute adults, standing shoulder to shoulder. The confrontation was brief and final. Words were spoken that did not need repeating, boundaries drawn that would not be crossed again. Afterward, as the adrenaline faded, she trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that she had not been alone when it mattered most. The town shifted then subtly. Respect replaced rumor. Some offered help without expectation, others simply looked away, chastened. Still, the greater battle was not outside. It was inside them. Nights grew colder, longer, and the pull between them deepened into something that demanded naming. One evening, snow falling thick and soundless, she invited him inside. The cabin smelled of pine and smoke, the fire casting warm shadows across walls she had raised herself. It felt sacred in its simplicity. They spoke honestly there, in the quiet space she had carved from wilderness. She told him she was afraid of losing herself, of becoming dependent, of loving and being erased again. He told her he feared waking one day to silence so complete it would break him, feared that hope might prove crueler than grief. The truths were heavy, but they did not crush them. Instead, they laid them down between them like tools, meant to build rather than destroy. When they finally touched, it was not rushed. It was deliberate, a choice made with eyes open. He kissed her, as if asking permission with every breath. She answered by pulling him closer, trusting him with the most fragile part of herself. There was no claiming, no saving, only two people meeting as equals, finding warmth in shared vulnerability. Love, when it came, was quiet and profound, settling into them like a promise kept. Spring returned slowly, the thaw revealing green beneath the snow. With it came life in forms neither had dared to imagine. The cabin became a home not just of solitude, but of laughter and planning. He did not sell his ranch. She did not abandon her independence. Instead, they built a life that honored both. Children came, not born of flesh at first, but of need. A brother and sister from the town, orphaned by illness, found refuge with them, and the sound of small footsteps filled spaces once hollowed by grief. Years later, when the trees had grown taller around the clearing, people spoke of the cabin and the ranch as if they had always been connected. They spoke of the woman who built her future one log at a time, and the cowboy who learned that longing was not weakness, but a compass. And on quiet evenings, when the fire burned low and the stars crowded the sky, they would sit together, hands entwined, knowing that what they had built was stronger than what they had lost. Because love, like a home, was not something you waited for. It was something you chose to build,